Come to me. Come to me. I've never shared my secret with any soul.
You've had these spells since childhood. Tell me what you can from the beginning.
It is like a dream. It was our wedding. When we turned around, everyone was dead. The stench of their bodies was horrible. Standing before me was death. But I'd never been so happy.
This creature is a force more powerful than evil. Its desire is to consume all life on Earth. Only you can redeem us. He is coming.
There is a devil in this world, and I have met him.
But you could never please me as he could. I'm ready.
Welcome back to Geek Channel 8. I'm Eric, and today with me is Chris Saunders, who is here because he wanted to watch Nosferatu, the 2024 version, with me. So we went to go see it at a theater on a college campus, which is an experience in itself. And it is a rainy, foggy night when we are recording this. I don't think there was a better night to do Nosferatu. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks for having me on. I'm very excited to talk about this film. This was my second time actually seeing this film, so I'm kind of coming at it today from maybe a different angle than, a first-time viewer. But I do think it needs to be said that I have not actually seen the original Nosferatu. So once again, maybe not coming at it from the same perspective that maybe the intended audience, intended viewer from the director, had in mind.
Well, I have not seen this film before, but I have seen this film before. Mainly because I've read Bram Stoker's novel Dracula, and on this program we have done the Universal Studios Bela Lugosi version of Dracula, Todd Browning's film. We have done the original 1920s Nosferatu by F.W. Murnau. We have done the remake of that, the 1979 Werner Herzog version. We've also done a bunch of other Draculas, including the Hammer horror Dracula with Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. We have done the 1976, 78, something like that, 77, I think it was 77, BBC adaptation of Stoker's novel. We also did the 1979 Frank Langella Dracula, some comedy versions of this like Love at First Bite and Vampire in Brooklyn. And we've also, of course, done Francis Ford Coppola's masterpiece, the 1991, it's called Bram Stoker's Dracula. We also did a couple of other ones that adapted it in one way or another. The Netflix 2020 version of Dracula. And then just most recently, we did the Last Voyage of the Demeter, which only covers the sea voyage, which we'll talk a little bit about the sea voyage in this one.
That is one thing that I noticed in that boat scene that I had thought about. I have not seen Voyage of the Demeter, but it makes me want to see it now.
And then the last one we did in this series was the comedic version with Nick Cage, Renfield, which starred Nick Holt as Renfield, which is interesting because Nick Holt plays Tom in this, which is a version of Jonathan Harker from most of the stuff. All right, so I have seen a lot of adaptations of Dracula. Probably even stuff we didn't even mention. We didn't mention Vampire Hunter D, the animated Dracula spinoff, or Dracula's Daughter, which was a sequel to the original Lugosi Dracula. So I've seen permutations of Dracula. Dracula Tales from a Virgin's Diary, which was the Canadian ballet version of Dracula. It goes on. I probably am still missing ones. So I feel like this Eggers version of Dracula, it is a pastiche of these other ones because there's only so many things you can do with it. And it definitely feels like he borrowed from a lot of previous versions. In fact, every time I see Nosferatu mentioned this 2024 version, there was also a 2023 Kickstarter version, by the way, that was a remake of the original Max Schreck 1920s classic, the Murnau one. But every time I've heard this 2024 version mentioned in the press or media, they talk about it as being a remake of the silent Nosferatu. However, I feel this version owes a lot more to Werner Herzog's 1979 version.
Interesting. Why so? I can't say I've seen it myself, but is there maybe pieces or like moments that you draw you to that?
Yes. Herzog was very ambitious. These Dracula adaptations follow one of two modes. Either Dracula is the romantic hero, seductive, this is the Bram Stoker's Dracula. This is what spawned True Blood and Interview with the Vampire and all of that kind of stuff. And then there's Dracula as plague and disease. And the original Murnau Dracula hints at that. Well, it doesn't even hint at that. In the title, interstitial cards that it has, because of course it's a silent film, it talks about a plague coming out of the East. And it was 100 years ago, over 100 years ago, that movie was made. But the novel was even earlier. And that's not that long after the last plague, bubonic plague, swept Europe. And in fact, the 1920s one came out just a couple of years after the 1918, I think it is, Spanish flu pandemic. This one comes out in 2024, just a few years after the COVID pandemic. So plague is on people's mind. Now, there was not, as far as I know, a huge global pandemic in 1979, but Herzog's version definitely embraces this, and he was very ambitious. And if you listen to our episode on that, we talk about it. He got hundreds of rats and let them loose in the streets. Oh, no. I think they were shooting in Belgium or something.
How'd they get the rats back?
Yeah. I don't think they planned on that part. Herzog comes up with these ideas and then, nobody says no, or if they say no, he finds a way around it. Anyway, as far as I know, those Herzogian rats still inhabit, or their descendants still inhabit wherever it was, Bruges or wherever they shot that thing. This one had that aspect to it. Lots of rats. Another thing is the ending. The ending of this version is, of all the versions of Dracula that have been made, this one most closely resembles Herzog's take on Murnau's version of Dracula Nosferatu, which, make no mistake, is a version of Dracula. It's called Nosferatu. Everybody likes to say, oh, this isn't Dracula, this is Nosferatu. It is Dracula. It follows Dracula beat for beat. As far as I know, the title was only changed to Nosferatu because they didn't have the rights to Dracula. And in fact, most of the prints were destroyed by court order, and the original black and white almost didn't survive, you know?
I was going to say, I remember hearing that there was a big court case around Nosferatu, essentially, being a copy or taking way too much artistic inspiration from Bram Stoker's Dracula. And if I remember correctly, I think it was Bram Stoker's wife who ended up getting that settlement. And I do believe, if I remember correctly, she had won the case. But I like what you said about kind of the two different things, the two different aspects of Dracula films, kind of the plague side and the romantic side. Because that was kind of, when I was watching this second time through, I was trying to take notes of things I didn't notice the first time when I was just enjoying. And the two biggest themes that I could kind of see were plague and lust were kind of the two main themes that I was seeing. And so certainly, yes, the plagues, the rats, leaning into, infectious diseases coming through.
We have a whole bunch of fireworks going off outside the window, which is weird. Yeah.
But then, real quick, the second part being that I wonder if they did take some of that romantic Dracula, but not so much the charming side or the romantic in a charming way, but more so the lustful side of Dracula, I guess. Bringing a quote from, I guess, Count Orlok, Nosferatu himself, he said, "I am an appetite, nothing more." I found that very interesting, almost kind of wondering if it's a nod to, the seven deadly sins and, maybe even gluttony being thrown in there as well. But I don't think that's necessarily a running theme in the Dracula series.
Yeah. So, there's going to be spoilers in this one. This is a spoiler alert. Fast forward if you don't want to hear the spoiler. So, in this one, the Mina character, which I think is called Ellen in this one.
Yes. Yep.
She basically seduces Dracula, quote unquote. This is straight out of Herzog. And keeps him there past the first cock crow in the morning, and therefore, vampires die in sunlight, and that's the end of him. As opposed to most of the other versions of Dracula, which do not have that. I can't remember if the 20s Nosferatu had that or not as an ending.
As far as the ending goes, because again, I have not seen that original Nosferatu, but the hand, I remember when I watched it the first time with my fiance's father, and he's a big fan of the original, or I guess the 1920s Nosferatu.
1922, yeah.
1922 Nosferatu. And he had said that hand was a big part of it. I'd be curious if you remember seeing that hand.
Yeah, there's a famous shadow where Orlok's going up the staircase.
Okay, so there was a big nod to that exact scene, I guess. And was that at the end of that 1922's?
No,
film?
it's when he's coming for Mina or Ellen, and it's in both previous versions of Nosferatu.
I see.
It's one of the most iconic images in cinema. Yeah. So let's jump back to the beginning. So this thing opens in Germany in 1838. Now, some of our fans, particularly international fans, might be screaming at the podcast right now saying there was no Germany in 1838, which is true. the modern state of Germany was founded in 1871. This, however, is not a mistake, because in 1838, the Duchy of Mecklenburg was what that area was known as, but it was colloquially referred to as Germany. So that still works.
So it was Germany unofficial then.
It was Proto-Germany.
Proto-Germany.
So the first time you saw this, did you go with Sophie?
I went with her dad, her little youngest sibling, and her older brothers.
Youngest sibling, how young?
19? No. 21. Now. They just turned 21.
And this is your wife's father, your father-in-law.
Yep.
And who was the third person?
Her oldest brother, who is...
Age?
20... I think he's 27 now.
Okay. What was the general reaction from family and then audience?
So the general reaction from their family was, including myself, was a bit surprised, but I would say that we all enjoyed ourselves, and I think the one with the most to gain, essentially, I guess, from the movie itself would have been her father, who was a fan of, that original, that 1922 Nosferatu, and he felt that in the right places, it upheld, I would say, the themes, and I guess he felt that it had treated it faithfully and fairly, this newer Nosferatu, to comparing to the older one. When we're, I guess, comparing that to audience reaction, I would also say that the audience, the first time I'd watched it was in Phoenix, Arizona. The audience seemed to enjoy it as well. I think there was a surprising amount of laughter throughout the film, some moments, and at the end of the movie, there was actually, I would say, it didn't seem any different from any other good movie. There weren't necessarily hoots and hollers. There was not any, boozer.
When I went to see it tonight and I got to the front door, I ran into other filmmaking friends of mine, and there was like 3 or 4 of us who were all filmmakers, and someone commented, like, this is cool. We, some of us haven't seen each other since before the pandemic, and we're like, this is clearly a filmmaker's film, and it totally is. There's a lot of nods to stuff. In fact, it reminded me of my first film, my first feature that I made, because this technique is something that I think I, quote unquote, discovered on my own, but they also use this technique in that, which is I shot some day for night scenes that were exteriors. And the way I did it was I sort of desaturated things, but I also pulled out all the red and yellow color from it so that it only retained the blue part of the spectrum. And I, did some other things like reduced the contrast and, stuff like that to simulate night. And I think it came out pretty good. Well, it turns out they did the same thing in here, although they used an algorithm, but it pulled out the color, the red and yellow end of the spectrum for the night scenes and stuff like that. Anyway, that was 25 years ago that I did that. And, I did a couple little experiments. So I thought that was interesting. I'll also mention that the castle scenes in this were filmed in the same castle that the Herzog version was. I think... So they actually shot in 3 different castles here. One for the exterior and 2 different ones for the interior. And I think one of the interior might have been from the 1922 one, but I don't know for sure. If you know, find us on Facebook and let us know. Another thing that seemed to come straight out of Herzog's version is gypsies and Dracula are a thing, like going way back. I think it's even in the novel. He has like servants who are gypsies. They're just the Romany people are known to inhabit that part of the world. But if you go back and listen to our one on the 1979 Nosferatu, we talk about how Herzog used actual gypsies, Romany people, speaking Romany in his version, and he didn't even know what they were saying. A lot of people, we don't know. I mean, someone I'm sure out there could translate, but there aren't that many people who speak Romany. As far as I know, there's only been one film ever made entirely in Romany. That film wasn't, Herzog's, of course, wasn't entirely in Romany, but it did have that scene, and apparently nobody knew what they were saying. And there's no subtitles, so...
Goodness.
But this one also has gypsies in it. The more interesting use of language in this is that Orlok speaks a reconstruction of Dacian or Dacian.
I haven't heard of it.
Dacian. It's a Balkan language. It goes back to ancient Greece, really. And I don't know whatever happened to the Dacians. I think, they were conquered by the Romans and sort of petered out after that. But I guess the suggestion is that Orlok is that old,
I mean, I got to say, just real quick, touching on some of the sound design, I guess, is, partially the language, but also I think how they mix it and how Bill Skarsgård delivered the lines. I really do enjoy when you hear Count Orlok speaking, because just the gravitas, the gravity of I mean, it really is kind of, you get a lot of the bass. Certainly, if you're in a theater or you have a good home theater set up, you can feel kind of his words in your chest a little bit. And just the fact that it really does sound ancient and primordial.
Yeah. The interesting thing about Bill Skarsgård behind the scenes on this is that he also played Pennywise the Clown in It.
Yeah, that's what I know him from.
and he, in both of these movies, It Chapter 2 and this, he went out of his way to laugh and joke around with the cast when he was in full makeup. Like, apparently he's wearing more makeup in this than Pennywise wears in It. So
I heard it was like 4 hours of setup with, I think, more than one makeup artist working on him at one time.
Yeah. But that is a big flip, especially for this character. This character has been played 3 times before. Orlok was played by Max Schreck in the 1922 Murnau Nosferatu. It was played by Klaus Kinski in the 1979 version of Nosferatu. And in the year 2000, there was a film about the making of the 1922 Nosferatu called Shadow of the Vampire, which starred Willem Dafoe as Orlok.
No, that's amazing.
And, he was playing Max Schreck. But Max Schreck supposedly creeped out all the other actors in the 1922 version. Max Schreck supposedly creeped out all the other actors, didn't hang around them. They all were creeped out by him. He's a weird, creepy dude, or was, supposedly. And so Willem Dafoe did that same thing when he was playing Max Schreck / Orlok. Because the whole thing, if you ever watch Shadow of the Vampire, the point is he's just so into the role that nobody's really sure whether or not he's actually a vampire, right?
They don't know if they're talking to Orlok or Max Schreck.
And if anyone knows anything about Klaus Kinski, he was also a very creepy dude, right? And there's an entire story about like when he was shooting in the jungle with Werner Herzog on Aguirre, The Wrath of God, or maybe it was Fitzcarraldo, one of those, and he goes crazy and like gets a gun and starts shooting at the rest of them, particularly at Werner.
Goodness.
Anyway, Kinski, also very strange, very creepy dude. So everyone else that has ever played this role on screen has kept a certain method acting mystique about the character. Bill Skarsgård did not do that. You want to talk about what the reaction was like to this on a college campus, which was about half college students and half old guys and professors and stuff?
This I found very interesting, and I guess I can kind of speak to this having seen it at just your average theater in Arizona, and then watching it in this smaller, more intimate theater on the college campus, with half kids and half older guys, professors. Just kind of, I feel like two different mindsets coming into it. I think, personally, the mindset I went into it with originally, to be honest, I didn't really know what I was in for. I just expected, I'm going to watch a cool, scary movie that has some history to it. I did not realize it was going to be, have as many sexual themes as it did, which, being next to my fiance's father, that was a bit of a surprise to me. I was not ready for that. But I would say that the college student part of the audience definitely didn't know what to do with having seen that movie. I mean, I actually saved a quote.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so as soon as the movie was over, it was met with much laughter, and even one guy got up behind me.
I'd say giggles.
Giggles, yeah.
Not much laughter.
It was not rowdy or chortling, a lot of chortling. But one guy got up behind me and he said, "What the fuck?" Sorry, he said, "What the fuck did I just see?"
Yeah, and we also had somebody in our row walked out and about halfway through and didn't come back. Yeah, it was interesting. I'm going to mention snow here because it happens in a lot of the Draculas and it happened in this. And they didn't use digital snow. They used powdered potato flakes, right? Frozen potato flakes. But I mentioned flakes because of the whole snowflakes. The younger generation. Yes. I feel like this is going to be a hard sell to anyone under the age of 30. There's a lot of non-consensual stuff going on in this movie.
Say the lightest.
And I think that the trigger warnings for this film are probably, if they had to give trigger warnings every time there was something triggering in this, it would be every 5 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, there's my old guy rant.
No, I'm with you there because again, it really did catch me by surprise personally. And, I think it definitely caught this audience by surprise as well, given the reaction with the movie having closed.
All right, let's talk a little bit about some of the differences from other versions. In this, and I don't know if it existed in the previous two Nosferatus, but definitely in most of the Draculas, Harker is not kept in the castle. He's just locked in there. It's not like he's being kept... Again, the more seductive version where there's the brides of Dracula are keeping him in bed basically the whole time.
That guy had it easy.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of interesting if you ever catch one of the ones that has a more true to the, I don't know if it's more true, but has the brides in it. Another thing that we should talk about is the sea voyage. The sea voyage, even in the novel, has never made a whole lot of sense to me because Dracula can't cross water.
Oh.
But he can if he's got his native soil. So on the ship, he takes his native soil, right? But it seems like a huge risk for Dracula to take a sea voyage because if that ship wrecks or anything like that and goes down, he's going to die. Because he can't get back to land, right? He might still be alive under the water, but he's pretty much toast.
And we saw he had a horse and carriage. I mean, that was made pretty clear, when it came and received Tom.
So I think the problem is, before the Channel, you couldn't get to the UK by carriage. You had to at least cross the English Channel. And I think there's also this parallel of one of the ways that the plague, and then this is even true of this latest one we've had with COVID, but one of the ways the bubonic plague, the Black Death, was spread throughout Europe, supposedly, is from rats on ships being brought over. So I think that that was something that is hinted at in the novel and then made very explicit in these various versions of Nosferatu, which is why they include the ship voyage. Now, that said, Nosferatu is a German cinema classic. And so, of course, it's believed to be set in Germany. It's actually kind of ambiguous. And in fact, with the interstitial titles in the 1922 one, they, depending on what country you're seeing it in, it's in your language. So it could believably be the UK. I don't know if they ever mention it. But Herzog is as much making a tribute to German cinema as he is to this story. In fact, as we mentioned in that episode, he doesn't really think much of the novel. I think he called it mediocre literature.
Oh, no.
But even in Herzog's one, it doesn't take place in Germany. As we said, it takes place in like the Low Countries, like Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, one of those. I forget which one. Possibly the Netherlands. And the ship arrives there and there are canals and all of that. And we see that in this version. It does not look like central Germany to me. But this one is actually set in Germany, which really doesn't make sense to go by ship, because from Romania or Hungary, the Carpathian Mountains, to Germany, Wisser, I think is where it's set. Mm-hmm. That only makes sense to go overland, because neither of those places has a port. So they'd have to go all the way to the Black Sea, all the way down through the Dardanelles, through the Mediterranean, through the Strait of Gibraltar, back up around the UK, all the way up past Norway and Denmark and all of that, to land at what's now the northern part of modern Germany.
Goodness.
And then go overland still. It just makes no sense. So it's clearly included here only for the purpose of maintaining consistency with what's come before.
I see. So Count Orlok went to great lengths to ensure that he was true to his predecessor.
I guess
literal great lengths.
Yeah. I did appreciate that they got the medical science somewhat accurate. We have seen in past versions of these Dracula films where they have blood transfusions, which was a fairly new thing in the 19th century. This one has ether. It has bloodletting, I think also happens in it. I like to make the joke from Saturday Night Live of Theodoric, the medieval barber played by Steve Martin, where he's like, some guy comes in and is cut off his hand or something. He's like, he's like, you look like you could use a good bleeding. Get the leeches. He's like, but I'm already bleeding. Who's the barber? Same thing here. It's like they do that. They also she doesn't have good circulation, so they're like, oh, well, just tighten her corset, It's like, okay, that seems counterproductive.
Right, keeps her from moving too much. Yep.
There's a lot of talk of somnambulism, which does appear throughout all the Draculas, but also reminds me a lot of Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, another German expressionist film from the 1920s. He pitched this film as a Merchant and Ivory film. Merchant and Ivory do all those British costume dramas. Merchant and Ivory cross with Hammer horror. And we talked about Hammer horror Dracula as well. Both of those, Hammer horror and Merchant and Ivory films, their big thing was the costuming, the period costuming.
One piece that I really liked from it was the scene where Nicholas Holt's character, Tom, he had just escaped Count Orlok's castle. He had jumped into a river, went downstream, and he was found by a girl who appeared to be of some sort of, convent. He was brought back. They did kind of, an exorcism-like ritual or trying to heal him from Count Orlok's influence. And there was a kind of a short moment of exposition. And normally, I'm not a huge huge fan of exposition. It can be quite lengthy and it can be too on the nose. But I think the kind of, I don't know what you call it, head nun of the convent, she was being translated by one of the younger nuns, and was kind of just giving a backstory on Count Orlok himself, which is really useful for somebody like me who hasn't spent much time in this world. And I really liked the description that they used for him. They called, they had mentioned that he was in life I think they said a black enchanter, like a dark enchanter, a warlock, you might be able to say. I don't know if that was any inspiration for the name Orlok, but he was a black enchanter in life, and the devil was the one who had saved his soul and kind of gave him all of those powers, I guess, in death, being able to live, I guess eternal life would be one of them, but those powers do end up being quite far-reaching, like on the voyage across the sea. He literally called to nature itself and said, essentially draw up your biggest storms to send me as fast as you can on your barbarous winds. I thought that was a neat line, towards the port. And given how long it sounds that voyage was, they would have needed some barbarous winds to get there in time with any amount of haste. And then, not to mention the shadow hand, and I loved that. I really did like that scene, kind of where he first got to the city and reached out over the city, and you could just see the shadow of his hand kind of reaching out, and the screams and whatnot.
That's in the original also.
That's in the original?
Yeah.
Okay, I love that. I love that. I think they did a great job of it here. And I think that really just kind of was, to me, one of his greatest displays of his power and influence over people and, I guess, magical forces.
You mentioned an exorcism. That is another thing that after the Dracula films, both the previous Nosferatu films, which are the biggest influence on this, and the Dracula films, and possibly more generally Merchant in Ivory and Hammer Horror, the next big influence on this is The Exorcist. Because you'll notice that Lily Rose Depp, she totally channels Linda Blair, and in this, all the way almost to doing the spider walk, doing, a bridge in the bed, eyes rolling back, cursing, and there's no projectile vomiting, but it was close. There was fluids coming out of her mouth and stuff like that.
I gotta agree. It was impressive how quickly she went into second bridge on a bed of all things, an unstable plushy surface. That was quite impressive on Lily Depp's part.
Yeah, a lot of weird contortions and stuff like that. This film definitely took some notes from The Exorcist. There's definitely an Exorcist vibe going on in a lot of it. In fact, they even say she's possessed by a demon, at one point. The Van Helsing equivalent character in this, whose name is super long and I forget what it is. I think I've got it written down here somewhere. The Willem Dafoe character, Professor Albin Eberhard von Franz.
If Willem Dafoe taught a class on alchemical studies, I would take it.
Like I said, the film, to me, I'm a little bit jaded having just come off seeing all these versions of Dracula. And, I feel like, every few years, it's a classic. You can remake it just like you remake a Shakespeare play or whatever, and everybody's got something new to add to it. And this is more modern and more polished and definitely very arty. I don't know how much truly new stuff is here, though. It seems like a pastiche of other stuff, and that's great. But it also means you got to temper expectations a little bit. I've heard of other audience reactions from other theaters. I've had friends go see this and people falling asleep
Ooh, it is a slow burn. It is a slow burn.
Also, I have some friends who told me that when they went to see it, there was a young couple who got up, and I think they might have fallen asleep too, at least the young woman, and the guy was like, "This sucks."
Oh.
Bunch of heavy metal kids, I think, who were expecting something a little more I don't know,
Exciting,
like a horror, like a modern horror film.
I see a little more slashery,
which
more
is
jump
not
scares.
what this is at all.
No. Which personally I kind of liked. I'm not a big horror fan, so I think it was a bit of a surprise, to my fiance when I went to watch it with her family, because she definitely does not like horror films, and so generally
I
don't think
consider
about
this a
watching many
horror
either.
film, by the way, but I have a very broad definition of horror, and I think horror is a big playground that can have a lot of different things in it, and this is horror. It's just not the horror people are used to.
Yes. I think they lean heavily on just suspense and at times silence. I really did appreciate, just to kind of like take a little vignette, when Thomas was finally reaching the castle, kind of, again, before anything really kicked off. It's still a slow burn at this point. And the carriage kind of pulled up and arrived. And in that moment, when the carriage door swings open, it's just completely silent. There's no sound. And I feel like you can really steep yourself in those lonely, dark woods. And I think there was good
But why
world
does he
building.
get in?
So that's a great question. Why does he get in?
I mean, I won't get into an Uber if I don't like the looks of it, Like,
this one had horses.
no, it didn't.
Oh,
it
that's
had
right.
horses at first, and then it didn't. And then, so another thing that people sometimes think is a goof is that the carriage, when they show it at first approaching, there's horses, and then when it stopped, doesn't have horses, and then when it started again, there's horses. But if you're familiar with other Dracula film adaptations, this is a thing. This is a running trope in Dracula movies. I don't know if it's in the book, but in Dracula movies is that they're like spectral horses. They're kind of not there. They're like sometimes there, sometimes not there, like.
So like, yeah, kind of going back to those little signs that he was starting to realize that he was in, for more than he had bargained for. And I personally am of the interpretation, I don't know which was stronger, his need to succeed in his quest to, essentially get Count Orlok to sign the contract, to buy the house in the Germanic city, or if he was kind of possessed, because there was a moment in the castle where he was possessed by Count Orlok to open a door for him, essentially. And so I wonder if it was that, or if it was just, kind of his personal determination to not fail on his job.
So the thing I don't know in all of these I've never figured out is, okay, does Orlok know about Ellen before he ever even comes there? Like, do they have this secret, like, connection to each other? And if that's the case, how does, of all people, this guy end up being the one that gets sent there? Or has Orlok engineered it so that he's the one that gets sent there? Or because in particularly in the Nosferatus, Renfield is not a separate character like he is in the book. He's his boss. He is the guy that sends him, the real estate guy that sends him ends up being the guy working for Orlok. Or does Orlok see her for the first time on his locket or whatever, which happens in a bunch of these, and then decides he must have her? And otherwise, how does he end up with this connection to this woman that lives super far away to begin with?
So So that's something. The first time I had watched it, I felt like I had missed a lot. And I thought I was paying attention pretty well. But as I understand it, Count Orlok and Ellen kind of had a connection made from when she was just a girl. And she was very lonely, She had no friends or something like that. Didn't feel love from her family, as I understand it, and kind of just called out to, I guess, to the ether, really. And the one who happened to respond was Count Orlok. They kind of made a bond then, but once she had met Thomas, gotten married, it sounded to me the second time through like the fact that they got married, that had kind of broken her previous connection with Count Orlok a little bit. So maybe he had less influence over her. So I'm thinking that Count Orlok had orchestrated, with great help from Herr Canuck. And I believe that was in Herr Canuck. He's the real estate boss, I guess, that sends Thomas on his quest, who, the first time I watched it, I mistook his, frankly, insanity for excitement, which you very, very quickly find out that, yes, he is working for Orlok and he is starting to go mad, which, by the way, I thought he did a fantastic job.
See, but in the book, Herr Canuck, or whoever, Harker's bosses, are completely different from Renfield, who is Dracula's assistant.
So they have no connection in those. They're
Well, no.
Okay.
They have no connection that we know of. Renfield is insane and eats bugs and, says the blood is the life and all of that stuff. However, and now we're getting to literary criticism and like speculation, but it has been speculated by some that Renfield was actually the first person sent to go, and that's how he made contact with him and comes back to England and it goes insane. But he's not the one that actually sends Harker. And the one thing that sort of supports this theory is that Bram Stoker wrote a short story called Dracula's Guest, which is kind of like the prequel to Dracula, and it is about somebody going to Romania to meet with Dracula about this land deal. And I haven't read it in a long time, so I don't know if it mentions that it's Renfield or if it's Jonathan Harker's trip there, which isn't really detailed that much in the novel, and it's just like he goes there. But so that's that. I think a lot of these things, like, stuff gets remixed into these things, and then like it becomes part of the legend and stays with it. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of things that weren't in Dracula to begin with, but have like gotten put in there and have stayed.
Yes, they've been picked up along the way of the various iterations. Yeah.
Yep.
I guess final thoughts is coming from my perspective of not being well read or well watched in this subject of Dracula. To be honest, I thought it did a great job of informing me at times, like I'd mentioned with that exposition, give me a little history, and where, like you had mentioned before, where it's a bit of a pastiche of many of the other titles, where that is a con or negative for some, especially for some of the more well-read, well-watched viewers. For somebody like me who's just coming in, that actually might be a strength of its. So if you are, I guess, a casual viewer of this type of content with a stomach for, some of the more sexual themes, to be honest, I think there's a lot of fun to be had here. I certainly would say that I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it the first time. The second time with, I felt the slow burn a little bit more. But again, ultimately, I really did enjoy this film.
All right. I'm going to lose some of my esoteric film nerd cred here, but this is not my favorite vampire film. Probably not even in the top 10.
Wow.
It is not my favorite Nosferatu adaptation, which would be the original 1922 Nosferatu. This might edge out Herzog's Nosferatu, but it's definitely not better than the original. Which, the original's still scary, in my opinion. If you watch that, turn out the lights, I watched it on Halloween a couple of years ago. It's still scary.
Give it a go.
It is enjoyable. It is artistic. It is philosophical. There's a lot there to think about. It's just not that fun. Not compared to a lot of the other vampire stuff and Dracula stuff out there. I think I can give it a reserved thumbs up, but it's not for everybody. My parents would not enjoy this. My sister probably wouldn't enjoy this. I have a lot of friends that wouldn't really enjoy this. The people I know who would enjoy this are a much smaller subset of the people that like movies.
I would agree on that. Again, I think going back to the reaction of this, at least on this college campus, I wouldn't be surprised if, half of the people had an overarchingly negative experience at it, given the things we heard, things we saw from both sides, from the, older, maybe even more educated audience on the topic and the younger audience.
I think also it's a little disjointed in places. I feel like it's not it could use some serious tightening up. It's long too. So I think that like a good editor could really do a lot to improve this movie. But anyway, there we have it. That's our take on this. If you like this episode of the show, you can let us know by writing to us at GC8 Podcast. That's letter G, letter C, number 8 podcast, all one word, at gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook. We've got a Facebook group and a Facebook page. And the Facebook page is just a page that we don't pay much attention to, but it's there. There is a Facebook group where we like to talk and interact about movies on. Because Facebook sucks, it is a private group and it won't let us make it public. So you have to sort of ask to join. We approve everybody, so just send a request to join or whatever. There's a real low bar to entry there. And then like and subscribe, give us a good rating or a rating on whatever platform you normally use to download your podcasts. We're also on YouTube. We don't pay much attention to that either because I've never quite understood the appeal of watching an audio podcast on YouTube. But if that's your thing, if that's how you want to stream it, we're there too. Until next time, this is Eric.
This is Chris.
Signing off.